Welcome to Teis Talks, where we discuss all things faith and family. We are here discussing part 2 of helping others cope with addiction with Pastor Neil Berkey, my husband.
Last time we were together, we talked specifically about the causes of addiction, why people get involved with addictive behavior, which was so insightful. But today we want to talk about some practical means of helping others cope with addiction.
Yeah.
And I just think this is so valuable, and I hope that this is as much a benefit to you as if you're listening as it has been to me, and as I have learned these things from Pastor Berkey. And so we're glad to have you with us again, Pastor Berkey. So let's start off, just get right into this. Talk to us about things that we can do to assist someone to overcome addictions.
Yeah, so just as a recap, understanding the defining addiction, we have to understand the definition of that. And that's where really there's this compulsive behavior psychologically that's been trained kind of into our mind as far as how we live, where we get comfort from. We talked about the different causes last podcast about the emotional trauma. So I've gone through this. As a result of this, now I'm reaching out to addictions. Emotional, there's relational. The relational is could have been caused by a family member. It could have been caused by aunt, uncle, some type of somebody that was close to me. That's the second cause of addiction. There's the physical, which is kind of I've been harmed. It could have been at school, could have been at work, or even at my home life. That's kind of guided me into this area of addiction. There's the cognitive and behavioral, which has affected kind of my mind and how I act. And then there's this spiritual, where it's just completely rebellion against God. I'm going to do my own thing. Now, just because this is the cause for addiction, or of addiction, I should say, does not mean that gives me permission to be addicted. So somebody may say this. Somebody say, I was harmed as a child. This is how I cope. Well, that's not the best way. If somebody expects to have a successful or a life that is purpose-filled, obviously, it doesn't look at one that has constant addictions, right? So that's where we have to understand, okay, how do I overcome these addictions? And that's what we're going to talk through today. Yeah.
And so we can be just addicted because I think if I do this thing, it's going to bring me some kind of satisfaction. It's going to bring me to some. So the person that gambles thinks this is how I release my emotions. This is what I need. Or even the guy that sits in front of his television set and is going with his remote from one thing to the next, thinking there's got to be something on there that's going to satisfy me.
Yeah. So we call that one the cognitive or behavioral. So something that doesn't necessarily where there's been trauma. There is this behavioral type. So it could be a hobby, right? It could be somebody making model trains or model cars, where that's where they're consumed with. I don't know how somebody could be consumed with that, but the reality is we may look at somebody and think, how can you do this? But we struggle with something similar, but on a different aspect. So,
Okay.
So that's where something just becomes consuming in one's life. So as we look to this area of overcoming addictions, the first thing I would say is this: the first point, we have to pray for that individual personally. There has to be where we're taking time and asking God on their behalf to overcome this difficulty. And the reality is there's some spiritual warfare that they're facing, and we need to go on their behalf to God as a result of that. So that's the first aspect is pray for them.
And I think sometimes we just say that so lightly. In fact, I think Christians say, "Oh, I'll pray for you," and they never do.
Yeah.
In fact, I can remember early on in our ministry, people would come back and say to me, "Oh, thank you for praying for me. This happened or that happened," and I thought, "Oh, I didn't pray for him."
Yeah.
And I think this thing about prayer is something that we really need to be determined we're going to do. If I see somebody with a need, then I really do need to write down their name and pray for them on a consistent basis, and pray for the particular need that they are facing, because God does hear and answer prayers. So that's your first point. I just don't want you, if you're listening, think lightly, okay, yeah, get to something practical.
Yeah.
No, prayer is a very, very practical thing. It's something we do. It's work that we are involved in on a daily basis. And if we're not doing that, then the next steps aren't going to work.
Yeah, I think about the guy, the maniac of Gadara in the Bible, where he was throwing himself into the fire. He was consumed with demons, and the disciples could not cast the demon out. And the woman came to Jesus, and she says, Jesus, why couldn't your disciples do this? And he said, this kind only cometh about but by prayer and fasting. And sometimes we do downplay the importance of prayer. And you've done several great podcasts as a result of what prayer does and how we can pray effectively. But I would say that's what it's number one too, because prayer is the vital aspect, the vital piece of this whole helping somebody. And so number one, prayer. The second aspect is this: find out more about their struggle. Now that doesn't mean this. It doesn't mean, well, if somebody's dealing with drugs, and I'm not trying to sound lightly or by no means am I trying to make fun, but if somebody's dealing with a drug, I don't need to necessarily do that drug to find out what it does to me so I can help them. I'm not saying that.
Yeah, become a drug addict to be able to reach drug addicts.
That's not at all what I'm saying. But it might be helpful doing a little bit of study on that drug and how it impacts you. I would say this as a result of that, knowing their struggle or finding out more about what they're struggling with. Number one is, I would say this: set guidelines. Under finding out about their struggle, set guidelines. Now, with setting guidelines, you have to understand, and I have to understand, we have to protect ourselves. So if there's a woman that is struggling with something, say maybe even her and her husband are having some difficulty, I'm not going to meet with that woman personally by myself to be able to be a help to her, because that's not wise for me to do. I have to set boundaries in my life. And so that's where we would say it's important to protect yourself as an individual. If somebody's struggling with addictions, say for instance, drug addiction, and I've had drug addiction, it's not good for me to go to be with that person where they're at facing the drug addiction, because now I'm going to have temptations to be involved with that. So I have to set boundaries in my life, and I have to know when not to go.
When I was first saved, and I wanted to witness to all my friends, I could remember going to pot parties and thinking...
You said pot parties.
Pot parties.
Yeah.
That's what we called them. They they smoked marijuana, everybody.
Oh, you didn't go and
thought you were
pot
doing-
plants.
No,
huh?
no,
It's
this is-
not gardening
no,
in the
this is-
1970s with your buddies in Las Vegas.
No. They were doing dope, and I would go in and I would think I'm really being a benefit and helping them, and I can remember sitting around, having them all sitting around smoking dope, and I'm talking to them about Jesus. I remember even one guy was like, he was out of his mind on dope, and he said, "Whoa, this is like Jesus and the apostles," and I walked out, and I'm really thinking I'm doing something. I walked out, and then I realized, oh my goodness, I've got a buzz from the secondhand smoke. This is not a good place to be.
Sure. Yeah.
So if you want to help somebody, you might want to find out about what they're struggling with, but you don't need to get in. You have to set those boundaries. And protect yourself.
That's exactly right.
You know.
The second aspect to finding out about their struggle is this. First of all, setting guidelines. Number two is find the root, not just the fruit. So if somebody, you may be wondering, what do you mean by that? Find the root, not the fruit. Well, this thing that they're struggling with is just a fruit of their problem. So somebody's struggling with depression, that's a fruit problem. Depression really isn't the underlying cause of what they're going through. Could be self-identity, their self-identity with Christ. And so that could be the fruit or the root of their problem is, as a lack of identifying with Christ, now they feel depressed because as a Christian, they're not connecting with Christ spiritually. And so now they're feeling depressed as a result of that. So just like we have a tree, we have a lemon tree at our house, and lemons are produced as a result of that tree. Well, the same thing is true in my life. There will be things that produce. Obviously, the Bible talks about the fruits of the Spirit. But if there's things that are being produced that aren't good, so you have depression, you have self-identity issues, you have homosexuality. All of these are fruit
Fruit.
issues.
I see.
Yeah. So somebody that may be struggling with homosexuality, I mean, it wasn't just one day, oh, I'm going to be a homosexual. It was probably a lot of home issues or home life, whether they may have been abused by a dad or whether they were neglected by a dad or parents. And so what they did is they sought out for affection, and somebody showed them attention. And so now they've been reprogrammed, and that's a fruit issue, homosexuality. But that's not the root issue. The root issue is they need to be connected, and the person that they need to be connected to is God. And so these are all. So I would encourage somebody, find the root of the problem.
And that's conversation. That means I've got to have a conversation with
Yeah.
them, and I got to ask them questions.
And we'll talk about that in just a second. So so the third aspect is do your research about the addiction, Bible principles, how to overcome that, things like that. I would even say, fourthly, under finding out more about their struggle, is ask a mentor for guidance. Maybe somebody that struggled with that was victorious over that. I mean, there's great resources. There's a resource here in town. There's a guy by the name of Mark Welchel. He's the executive director of a place called Renewing Life Center, and it really helps people that are addicted to find help. I love Focus on the Family. Jim Daly. They have a family health specialist that you could reach out to anytime at all, 24 hours a day. It's 1-800-A-FAMILY, 1-800-A-FAMILY. It's 1-800-232-6459. And you can talk to somebody about if you're struggling with an addiction. I'm so thankful that there's resources where you can go back to and ask somebody for Christian advice. And so if you're struggling specifically, I would encourage you in that way. The other thing is, I would say, too, about finding out more about their struggle is really encouraging them and telling them how thankful they are for speaking out. Sometimes that's probably one of the most challenging aspects is communicating and to say, hey, look, this is what I'm struggling with. This is the difficulty that I'm facing. And what they need to do is they probably are very scared or fearful about what is somebody going to think of me, or how am I going to be reacted to? If I tell somebody this is what I'm facing, they're going to yell at me, or they're going to say, how can you believe that?
Or they're going to think less of me. Our pride has a lot
You're exactly
to do
right.
with us not wanting to tell people.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So provide hope and give guidance. Congratulate them in the aspect of saying, I'm so thankful that you told me about this. Let's get some help. I want to be able to find you some help and to be able to assist with that. And so tell them how grateful you are, but then develop steps for them to see victories. They have to see that their sin and damage that it's causing to them. There's one thing I think you had. There's a great acronym, HALT. HALT stands HALT. HALT. Many times, somebody that is facing addiction is because of one of four emotions. They're hungry. So they seek that hungry craving. They seek out for that addiction at that time. Or maybe they're angry. They're emotionally charged. And so that's whenever they'll seek that addiction. Possibly it's whenever they're lonely. This idea of seclusion and no one's around. And so that's whenever they'll seek out. Or possibly tiredness. They've just been exhausted. And so they'll reach out to that addiction for comfort. And so we have to help that individual overcome those difficulties. And so developing steps to help them to see victory. And they can see victory. They have to understand that there's hope. So we've talked about this idea of praying for them. We've talked at this idea about finding more out about their struggle. And you had brought up this idea of talking to them, conversations. And so there's several conversations that we need to go through with them. And I would say this as a slogan: ask, don't attack. So as you're asking these questions, I'm asking to help bring out information, but I'm not attacking them.
If you attack them, if they feel attacked,
Yeah.
you've just shut off every opportunity to say
Yeah.
anything. Well, why don't you just do this? Then why don't you just do that?
Yeah.
If a person feels attacked, they'll back off, especially somebody with an addiction. They'll back off into a corner and just walk away and go back to their addiction.
Yeah.
I think that's so important. I
Yeah.
want to ask you a question before you go on to this. You said HALT stands for hungry, angry, and then there was an L and a T. What?
L stands for lonely. So
Oh, yeah.
this idea when you feel as if you're all alone, no one's there to assist or to help, and so now I'll go to that addiction as a result to feel
To
satisfaction,
fill that void.
to fill the void.
Yeah.
And then T stands for tired. So I've just expended a lot of energy. Maybe it's through work, maybe it's through helping others, and I'm just tired. I'm vulnerable, and that's many times when people will go to those addictions. So
Okay.
if you're trying to encourage somebody from the addiction, they have to identify at what point to be able to successfully overcome that. You have to find out when it is. Am I being attacked when I'm this idea of hunger, these cravings? Is it because when I'm angry or lonely or even tired in my life? And so that's when you start developing a plan. So as we talk through the questions, here's just a sample of a few of the questions, and we can kind of share a few different ones. But do you know that this is a great question to ask. Do you know that there's more in life than this? Have you ever thought about life without this addiction? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to offer hope, because all they've ever lived is this addiction. They don't know what success is like. Somebody that's struggling with pornography, which is such a damaging addiction.
Yes.
You say, do you know what it's like being free from pornography? And just wait, pause, because they're gonna think through. And the whole idea of this is you're trying to help them to dream again. They can have success, they can have victory, but somebody said this, that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But somebody then said this not too long ago. They said, you can put salt in the oats. And what that does is it allows them, as they're mulling over this thought process, it's giving them hope, it's giving them courage, it's giving them the ability to see, I can make it. And so you're trying to help them with that. But that's a great question, right? To be able to ask them.
Yeah.
The second time is to get a little, I would ask this question: when was the first time that you became involved in drugs or whatever it is, alcohol? And what you're doing with this is you're getting a little bit of background information. So understanding, if this person's 40 years old and they struggled with this since they were 20, this isn't something that's just going to be just a quick shift or turnaround. Yeah, this is going to be a little bit of a long haul for them. And so,
on the other hand, if they say, I just got it started in this 6 months from now, you can say, whoa, we got to help you put on the brakes now.
Right.
Or 20 years down the road, you're going to be.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. And then who introduced you to that? Understanding a little bit more of the causes of the addiction. Have others been impacted by your involvement with this addiction? Man, this helps to really see the damage that addiction can cause in our life. Sometimes an alcoholic may not see the damage that does, or even pornography see. They may not be able to see the damage that causes to a spouse or to even kids. Somebody asked me, I was assisting them with overcoming pornography, and they asked me this question. They said, what do you do in your life that helps keep you pure? And at that point, I'd never been asked that question before, and I thought, that's a good question. They were asking me the question. Yeah. How do you stay pure? What do you do? And I thought, man, that's a really good question. As I began to think, I this is what I thought about. I said, after I thought about it for a few moments, I said, the thing that helps me to stay pure? I said, this is the thing that helps me to stay pure. Looking at my kids in their eyes and saying this, Daddy failed. I can imagine the hurt, the weight, coming and telling Charity, my wife, and saying, look, I'm so sorry. I've been involved with this addiction, and I can't imagine that. Now, that's not to say that somebody that has been involved with that can't have hope, but the whole idea is that's the thing that motivates me. That is the guardrails, if you will, on my road of life to help navigate me from going off the cliff.
I had an evangelist say to me one time, years ago, He said, Dave, he said, there's been opportunities to do the wrong thing. He said, but I could not stand to look at my wife in her eyes and think I hurt her like that. I mean, I know what I would do to her if I did this, and it stops me from doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's helpful to understand.
Well, these are great questions to get into the conversation.
Something you told me years ago is that almost every time you talk to somebody who had an affair or they've gotten into pornography, every single one of them, when you ask them how their prayer and walk with God is, they're always that they're like, yeah, it hasn't been consistent. It hasn't been consistent. And yes, of course, you don't want to look at me and be like, oh man, I failed in our life. But the way that keeps you pure, from what you told me, is that every day getting up early in the morning and bowing before God and praying and asking him for purity, and then spending time in his word. And that's what you consistently do on a regular basis. So I think that's something that people have to get in their minds, because you're not going to do it by sheer willpower.
Yeah, that's a great thought. And I'll continue to use the automobile illustration. If I had a vehicle that I had for 10, 15 years, and I absolutely did nothing to maintain that vehicle is going to fall apart. The shocks are going to get worn out. The brakes are going to go bad. And spiritually in my life, I have to have constant preventive maintenance. And that's what prayer is. That's what spending time with God is. Obviously, it's a relationship, don't get me wrong, but it's preventive maintenance. It's helping.
It's the truth.
The Bible says the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. Well, if I'm not hearing from God, he's not going to be able to guide me.
And if you're not continually aware of his presence.
That's it.
And when you're in his presence every morning, you're aware of his presence every minute. And the thing that you're driving down the road, you see a filthy billboard. There's God. God's watching, and you say, God, I'm looking the other way. I'm not going to lust after that thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
So let's go through two more of the questions that we have here, and that's this: how has this activity negatively impacted your life? So, what you're trying to do with this question is to help them to understand the challenges as a result of their activity, how it's impacted them. Sometimes somebody may think, well, it's not impacted me in a negative context. Well, let's just take a few moments. So your life right now is exactly perfect. Well, no, I wouldn't say it's perfect. Okay, well, how has it impacted your life then? And so you come back with questions. These questions, you'll notice they're not yes/no questions.
Yes.
They're how, why, when, or what. They're very objective to the point that it goes back to a location or goes back to a time or how it's impacted us. And so then I would say this: the last question I would ask is this: Would you like help in quitting? Obviously, well, yes, I would. If somebody says no, then there's nothing that you can do for that individual. They say yes, then that's where you want to start helping out and to say this. Okay, how do you see life improving as a result of this? Is start helping them to build a plan at overcoming this addiction. And that leads us to the fourth area. So this idea of praying for an individual, we see this idea of knowing about the struggle, point number 3, asking conversations that are just difficult at times. But then I would say this is knowing where your boundary is. As an individual that's trying to help a friend, you have to know where your boundaries are. We talked about that earlier, but you have to know when to not be mentally connected, or you have to have a boundary in that way specifically. Earlier, we were talking about more physically. This way is more mentally and emotionally. You have to know where to draw the line. But you do that by understanding this thought. Do they desire to change, or do they desire relief?
Oh, that's a great question.
There is a difference. Sometimes we think, oh, no, they're the same. No. To change, if that individual is just wanting relief, they feel the pressure of their addiction, but they're just wanting the pressure off, you're not going to be able to help them. You get them on a path of good momentum and longevity, but when you're gone, they're right back in the rut that they were at. They were in. Why? Because they didn't want change. They wanted relief. And so knowing the difference for that, and one of the things that Charity and I do whenever we help or assist people is we always tell them, this is the homework that we're giving you. We want to see this in your life. If you want us to help you for the next step, you're going to do this. And so I want them to understand how valuable our time is. Now, though our time is valuable, we want to be able to help people, but we want them to be able to see too how valuable our time is, just like we want to value their time.
Sure.
Yeah.
So how much is worth it? How much is this worth to them?
Yeah.
I keeps going through my mind what one of my mentors said to me years ago. He said, if you try to help someone who doesn't want help, you'll wind up needing help yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I read a great passage in Romans chapter 15, and I want to share this briefly with you. In Romans chapter 14, where it talks about the weaker brethren, in Romans chapter 15, it really helps us to be able to understand what our job and our role is as a Christian. He says this in this verse here, Romans 15, verse 1. He says, "We then that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak, and not to please ourselves." There's a point to which we should help people. But this word ought, he says, and not, and where he says that we then that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak, that word ought means to owe. We owe it to others to help them, those that are weak in the faith. It's our obligation to help them. Ought sometimes gives the connotation of, it's something you should do, or maybe one day, or if you don't do it, it's not that big of a deal. But that word means to owe. And so we owe it to others that are not as strong as us. We owe it to them to help them. But we have to know that that they want help.
Because somebody helped us.
Because somebody helped us. That's it. So number 2, don't feed the addiction. So asking the right questions, not the wrong ones. We have to ask the right questions. Do not give them ways to be able to obtain that. You don't help them. You don't enable them getting, I know you're addicted to drugs. Yeah, I am. I want to stop. Well, here, let me give you some lesser drugs to be able to help. No, we don't enable people to help them. That's not our job. Our job is to help give them guidance.
That's secular counseling right there.
Yeah. So, and then I would say this, and do not feed the addiction. Don't overtax yourself. Properly study. Know where your balance is. There's times that you need to say, you know what, I've helped you as much as I can. I want to be able to point you to another person who might be able to help you a little bit more than I can. And we shared a few resources earlier. And then what are you trying to get out of this? Because there is something that you as a helper, you're wanting to get out of this. Whenever I help people, one of the things that I want them to do is I want them to grow in their discipleship process. I want them to be a closer Christian and follower of Christ. And so that's where I find joy at helping somebody, because there's people that have helped me in my life. And then the last thing I would say is this: steer clear of getting emotionally involved yourself. Build healthy boundaries. If you find yourself, and I say emotionally involved, where this is causing you not to be able to sleep at night, because this is all consuming to you, you need to take a step back.
We found, my wife and I, when we first started counseling people, young couples, we would go home afterwards, and she would take her side, and I would take his side, and we would find ourselves fighting the fight that they were fighting, and we thought, man, we can't do this.
Yeah.
Or the opposite would take place. Well, don't you see what my wife would say, don't you see what she was trying to do?
Yeah.
And I would say, no, look what he was doing.
Sure.
And then we would wind up, so you got to guard yourself from that
Yeah.
as well. I mean, it's being able to help is one thing, but when it begins to emotionally affect you and your family, you got to back off somewhat from that.
That's exactly right. The last thing I'll say is this: there has to be an end point. So at some point, there's an ending. This isn't, I'm helping you indefinitely. You're 30 years old. I'm helping you till you're 70. No, there is an ending point. So by this time, I am anticipating that you're going to be, being able to be victorious over this. And if not, you're pivoting and you're helping them to find somebody else. But for those that have just been involved with this addiction, it might be a shorter process. But there's a point to which you're saying, okay, this is the end road for me. And then, I've gone as far as I can, but there's others that I want to direct you to be able to help you to go to finish your leg of victory, your final lap. And so
I want to ask you, because I know that for us, you have a policy where you meet with people up to about 3 different times if they've done their homework and they've done everything. And then you have found people here in Las Vegas, like counseling centers that you suggest them to go to, and you give them their contact to let them know, hey, look, this is where we go. So if you were, let's say you were like in Tennessee and you're doing what you're doing, what would you tell a pastor that's there that's like, man, I've met with these people for like 6 months straight and we're seeing some progress, but this is all I'm doing instead of actually, all the other, it's taken away from all my time. What would you suggest that they do in finding a counseling center or something like that?
Yeah, so we talked about a couple areas here in Las Vegas, which Renewing Life Center, but there's also an area, it's called Focus on the Family. You can go to Focus on the Family, and you can find a specialist in your area. You can call that number, which I told you, which I shared with you, the Family Health Specialist, the 1-800-FAMILY. That's 1-800-232-6459. But you can also go on, and they have specific counselors, certified counselors in your area, or the closest one to your area. And you say, you know what? If you're counseling somebody, like I've gone as far as I can, I would find a counselor and I'd be like, hey, look, I've given you all the resources, all the tools that I have been able to give you. I want to be able to help you more, but I'm limited at my capability. And so I want you to go, this is our next step, is I want you to reach out to this individual. And so, but that's Focus on the Family has that. You go to focusonthefamily.org, I believe, is their website. And
you can also go to James Dobson's new website too, the Family
Matters.
And
yes.
and Tim Clinton. They have a resource where you can find counselors in their area.
And they're going to be giving biblical, solid advice. And that's where you're going to be wanting to send them to, because you can't be on their journey for all 70 years of their life.
You can't. You can't.
That's super helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me say this as well. This is, I think, very important. No matter how much time you spend counseling with somebody, if when that time comes to cut for your own well-being, you will feel guilty. There will be those who will make you feel guilty for no longer meeting with them. And what you have to do is just recognize that all of us have limitations in our life, and there's only certain things that we can do, and you can't allow the guilt thrower to cause you to lose sleep. My brother was an alcoholic. And I would do everything I could when we first moved out here to help him, but he would drain, and there was no repentance. There was no change. Yeah. It was just he came to me when he was in a moments of crisis, and there had to be a point where I said, no longer, you can't come to me unless you want to do it this way.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be there for you anymore.
And that seems harsh, but the reality is if they're not willing to do that, they're not willing to stop. And so that's where you have to understand. Let me give you a few resources, and I think our time will be done today. Tim, you talked about Tim Clinton a few moments ago. He wrote this book, Turn Your Life Around, Breaking Free from Your Past to a New and Better You. It's Tim Clinton, a really good resource. There's another one by Stephen Afterburn. It's called Healing is a Choice, 10 Decisions That Will Transform Your Life and 10 Lies That Can Prevent You from Making Them. Really good resources. And so those two, I think, will be a help to you. But this idea of helping others, we want to be able to be a help to others, and we can be. The situations that we faced in our life, the overcoming those problems, and as we've gone through those, we can help somebody else that's facing those. So that way we can point people to Jesus, and then they in turn can do that. And really that's this idea of discipleship, multiplication as God intended for us to be able to impact our world with.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing that. I have, you've been a help to me in personally in my addictions. I have an addiction. I have an addiction to
Playing rook.
Well,
Every time we go over to their house, he's like, Neil, let's
that's
play
not what I
rook.
was saying. I have an addiction to Welch's grape juice.
He does that
I
too.
keep it in my refrigerator, and
Neil is so helpful to you in this area.
He comes and drinks all my grape juice.
Wow.
No,
And
he
so-
doesn't just drink it. He takes
I take the lid off and I take a big swig and I put the cap back on. I'm confessing my sin right now.
He takes the hidden bottles that are in my mom's closet and takes them
And it's
home.
helped me because there's been times I've needed that, but it's not been there for me because he's taken it away. So I know that you've helped me, and I know that you've been a help to so many others today.
It's always a joy to be with you men here on Teis Talks. Thank you for joining us.
It's been a joy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us here on Teis Talks. And remember, this is Teis Talks.
And it's more than a conversation.